Alright folks, I'm going to let you know right up front, this is not going to be the sexiest video I've ever shot. We're not going to be looking at amazing homes. We're not going to be talking about all the wonderful things that Richmond has to offer. It is nonetheless very, very important to both buyers and sellers. As you have seen in the news and online, earlier this year, the National Association of Realtors reached a settlement regarding various commission lawsuits. One of the main topics of these suits dealt with the transparency around how realtors get paid. These changes resulting from the settlement were enacted in August of 24, and then we recently had another update in November on how we're going to be handling these changes in the Richmond market. So there's been a lot of information, and in some cases disinformation, on the news and online about these changes. So I'm going to try to cut through all of that noise today in this video and break down for you in easy to understand language, definitely not legalese, that is not my cup of tea, what this means for both buyers and sellers. So if you do get some value out of this video, please make sure you subscribe below and tap that notifications bell so you can be the first to know about what's happening in the Richmond real estate market. All of my contact information is also linked in the description right below if you would like to discuss how this will, affect your real estate plans over the next year or so. And we're going to get after it right now. So we're going to start this conversation on the seller side. It kind of makes sense to talk about the listing side first because what happens in the listing agreement sets the table for what happens on the buyer side. One of the major changes now is the seller no longer has to pay a buyer's agent commission to be listed in our MLS. As a matter of fact, the buyer's agent commission is now no longer even mentioned in the listing agreement. That is super new. Let's back things up a tad bit for a minute to the previous way we did things, because most people understand and are familiar with it because this is the way it's been done for years and years. In the old way, when a listing agreement was signed, our company policy at Joiner was we sign it for 6%. We kept 3% as the listing broker and we offered to share 3% with the buyer's broker. Now I'm a visual learner, so let's take a look at section 5 from our previous listing agreement entitled Compensation, and you can see how that was written. So you'll see 6% was the total in the first paragraph, and then 3 was shared with the buyer's broker in the second paragraph. Now contrast that to now, what we're doing under the new rules. There is absolutely no mention of paying a buyer broker in our listing agreement. Again, let's jump over to the actual new form and take a look. Section 6 of our current listing agreement entitled Listing Broker Compensation. Notice the name of the entire section was changed to let the seller know that it is only Listing Broker Compensation. Now this is where we would put in 3% to list the home as required by Joiner policy in paragraph A. So you will see an additional paragraph B. This deals with what happens if an unrepresented buyer purchases the listing. Now in this case, the listing agent will have to do some additional work on the transaction since they will have to complete a lot of those ministerial functions usually performed by the buyer's agent. So additional compensation for the listing agent in that situation can be negotiated here. For illustrative purposes, I put in 1.5% in that line, but this could be more, could be less. That is negotiable.
So I have created a very handy relocation guide that can save you hours of time and effort, and you can link to that right below. It's a must download, and I think you'll get some great information out of it.
Now let's drop down to section 7 of the new listing agreement entitled Owner Paid Buyer Broker Compensation. It reads, and I quote, "A prospective buyer may retain a buyer broker to represent buyer in a transaction to purchase owner's property. Owner has the option to pay some or all of the compensation due to the buyer broker." Now this next section is in bold, so you know it has to be important. Owner acknowledges that owner has no obligation to pay a buyer broker commission. If the owner desires to pay buyer broker compensation, such compensation should be negotiated and set forth in the purchase agreement between the owner and the buyer. So this is the point where sellers may have a big smile on their face and be jumping for joy and thinking, I don't have to pay a buyer's agent commission. Hallelujah! I saved 3%. Now that's what a lot of these news outlets are telling you. While this technically may be correct, don't get too excited and let me tell you why. There is about a 100% chance any contract that you will see will have written into it that the seller pay the buyer broker compensation. On the new purchase agreement, there is even a brand new section where we write this in. So let's jump over to our revised purchase agreement, because again, I'm a visual learner, and we're going to take a look at Section 5, Seller Concessions. The second paragraph is entitled Buyer Broker Compensation, and this is where the buyer's agent commission will be negotiated. Now, there's always a chance in multiple offer situations that a buyer will pay their agent instead of asking the seller to pay this fee, sort of in order to sweeten their deal compared to those competing offers. But I think those instances are going to be fairly rare. Now, sellers, here is the bottom line. Under the old way of doing things, the buyer's agent compensation was a pre-negotiated concession that was dealt with at the time of the listing agreement. The only difference now is that concession to the buyer's agent is negotiated at the time of contract and not up front at the time when you list your house. So while it's no longer printed in black and white in the listing agreement, we still encourage sellers to be open to paying this buyer's agent compensation at the time a contract is received. Factor it into your math when you're looking at the net sheet that breaks down your potential proceeds from your sale. Now, here is why. First, I am finding most sellers out there are still willing to pay this fee at the time of contract. So if you are unwilling to pay some or all of the buyer's agent compensation, you are putting your house at a disadvantage when it's compared to your competition. Remember, buyers aren't just looking at your house, they're looking at others as well. So you always have to know what the competition is doing. Also, buyers face a mountain of closing costs when purchasing a home. So when you agree to cover the buyer's agent fees in the contract, the number of buyers that can afford your home goes up exponentially. This way they have less cash they can bring to the closing table, and it really frees up a lot more potential buyers. Now that we have the seller side covered, let's talk about this from the buyer's perspective. One of the new rules that came along in the lawsuit is you now have to sign that buyer broker agreement prior to your agent showing you any properties. So gone are those days of looking at properties until you find the right one and then you sign this agreement, the buyer broker agreement, when you're ready to make that offer. I've done that in the past, but now the saying goes, you have to sign to see. Have to do that up front, new rules. So for buyers who are a bit nervous about signing a buyer broker agreement with an agent you may not know too well, there are some options here to ease your mind. The agreement can be signed for a specific property or for a short period of time, like a weekend or a week. You don't have to sign that long-term commitment with an agent that you're still getting familiar with. Now, if you do know your agent and are comfortable with them, I do recommend signing a longer term agreement though, so you're not having to go through this process over and over and over again, with every home you see or every weekend you go out to look for homes. That can get a little bit tedious. So again, I'm a visual learner, so let's jump over to that buyer's agency agreement. The first thing you're going to notice is it says this is negotiable, which is true, but our policy at Joint or Find Properties is we charge 3%, so that's what is written in my illustration. Buyer's agent compensation is now very, very clearly defined in this new agreement. So now this is where buyers might be getting a little nervous, thinking they're going to have to cover their agent's compensation potentially. Now this is also where I try to calm your nerves. I am still finding most sellers are willing to accept a buyer's agent commission in that contract as a concession. When we write a contract, I will always, for my buyers, put 3% in this line in the contract, and there is a very good chance that this will be accepted, so my services will cost you nothing. Now this is in the perfect world how things would happen. As we all know, however, this is far from a perfect world. So there is a potential that the seller could counter offer back and offer an amount less than 3%. And this is where you have a decision to make. Let's make the math easy, and let's assume you're purchasing a $400,000 home and the seller counters back at a 2% buyer's agent commission, not the full 3%. If you accept this, you would have to pay $4,000, which is 400,000 times 1%. That would be a line item on your settlement statement for a broker fee. So that would increase the amount of cash that you have to bring to closing. You also have the option of declining this counteroffer, and we can keep looking at homes until we find a seller willing to pay that full buyer broker compensation. And they are out there, trust me. That is 100% your choice how we handle this. Now, if you really do love that house in this example and you don't want to bring the extra $4,000 cash to closing, we can look at the option of raising your offer by $4,000 to cover this expense, so you're basically financing it. There's all sorts of options we can discuss to get creative if you really fall in love with a particular home and that seller's not paying the full commission. So I've been doing this for over 20 years, so trust me, I know how to get creative. So now, if you're thinking that 3% sounds like a pretty strong fee to represent a buyer, let me help make sense of this for you a bit. The buyer's agent does a ton of work on your behalf. They will find you the right home, they'll negotiate a successful contract, they'll get you through all the contingencies like home inspection and appraisal, they're going to coordinate with the lender, the title company, the closing attorney, and so much more. So if you go straight to the listing agent to purchase a home, they cannot help you negotiate one bit since they already work for the seller. Now, with the market softening down just a little bit more favorable to buyers right now, a buyer's agent with strong negotiating skills can be worth every single penny of that commission and then some. And like I mentioned before, there's a strong chance the seller will be covering that commission completely, or at least a good portion of it. But in the event you do have to pay a portion of that buyer's agent commission, I promise you it is worth it. All right, so we're entering a brave new world in real estate. Conversations on commission will just really need to be handled on a house-by-house, offer-by-offer basis. With all these changes, it's very important to work with an agent that understands this new landscape so they can help you understand your options. Now, at Joyner Fine Properties, our broker has been absolutely on top of this. They have done an excellent job of giving us ample training on the new rules and regulations, both in-house and through our local Realtor Association. Now, the local attorney that teaches these classes for the association let us know that there are a ton of agents that have not attended any of the provided training. Now, that absolutely blows my mind because these changes are pretty darn significant. So whether you're buying or selling, if you want to understand more about these changes, how they affect you and your options that are available, give me a call, shoot me a text, send me an email. All of my information is linked in that description right below. And until next time, I hope to show you around town. Take care, folks.